Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. And welcome, Craig. I'd love to introduce you to my audience before we get started, if that's okay.
Thanks.
Everyone, this is my friend Craig Emmerich. He graduated in electrical engineering and has always brought a systems approach to his work. An international best-selling author, along with his wife, Maria Emmerich, he spends most of his time researching nutrition and biology from a systems perspective. Together with his wife, Craig has worked with thousands of clients from all over the world over the past 20 years, helping them to heal their bodies, to lose weight, and to leverage their biology for optimal results using a ketogenic lifestyle. Recently, his own journey with Lyme disease has moved him even further along that path and into the world of carnivore eating, which I'm sure we are going to hear some more about today. So thank you so much, Craig, for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you for having me on.
So before we get into it, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into the realms of nutrition and lifestyle.
Yeah, I graduated in electrical engineering and went into the business world of being an engineer and eventually into product management. And along the way, I met Maria and, we got married, and she struggled through high school and later in life with a lot of ailments and issues that she tried to figure out herself what was going on and how to fix it, because she was doing all the things the correct way, if you will, of following the food pyramid and healthy whole grains and low fat, and nothing was working. She had acid reflux, PCOS, all these issues. So she started researching on her own and eventually went to school for nutrition and exercise science and still didn't get any new information really. So she started researching on her own and finding out about low carb, about keto, and these things, 20 years ago, and implementing it on herself saw huge improvements. Me, it took probably 5-6 years to come along. Guys are usually a little more stubborn, and, German background, I used to brew my own beer, so that was hard for me to go away from. And, so a lot of these things slowly implemented with me. I didn't have the health issues she had, so it wasn't as an urgent of a thing for me. But, I had probably 40 extra pounds of weight and all that, which as I finally did come around to going keto, mostly not because I was trying to fix my body at the time, but because it just felt so much better when I ate that way. I just decided I want to do this full time, and I felt great. And so that's kind of how we came around into this, probably 15 years ago for myself, 20 for Maria. And then we started writing books. And, everything kind of has developed from that point. And it just made a lot of sense that I come away from engineering because I was already spending so much time keeping her blog going, helping her with books and all this, just to dedicate my time to, all the clients she was having, our business. And we did that about, 10 years ago or so, and just dedicated to this full time. And in the process, I just started learning as well. I got the engineering mindset of, if you don't constantly research, you're going to be out of date in 6 months, right? So I'm got that mindset from engineering that I just applied to nutrition and have since just learned everything I can.
Yeah, and your books are really a testament to that. I mean, they're like encyclopedic, each of them. And it's like you're coming out with a new one every time I have them all because they're amazing. As a matter of fact, my computer is stacked on all of your books, and I didn't even plan that. That's really funny. No, because they're great, and they're all such a wealth of information. Tell us a little bit more about what a systems approach looks like.
Yeah, I think in healthcare today we look at the human body as kind of a flawed machine, right? You got bad genetics. You're just, there's nothing you can do about this autoimmune, or this is just the way you are. And so we'll put a Band-Aid on it with this prescription or this medication to kind of mask the symptoms, but never really get back to solving the root of the problem. And that's kind of what healthcare is today in America. And it's pretty sad. From an engineering approach, I look at things as, if I've got a chip and my outputs are wrong, the first thing I'm going to do is go look at the inputs and say, okay, what was one of my inputs wrong? Is that what, is causing the problem? Typically the chip's going to, if it's a logic chip, it's going to do what it's supposed to do if you give it the right inputs, right? The body is very much the same. If you give the body the right inputs, it largely does what it's supposed to do with them. It's when we get the inputs wrong that the outputs get wrong. And the inputs are, nutrition is a huge one, getting common sense sun exposure, getting sunlight and vitamin D and cholesterol sulfates that are made in the skin and all these healthy things, not smoking, getting enough sleep, getting circadian light, all these inputs to your body are inputs. And if they get off, you get bad outputs. You get metabolic disorders, you get cancer, you get autoimmune disorders. And so that's kind of the, excuse me, looking at it a systems perspective is, let's go back and fix the root cause. Let's fix the inputs. And then the outputs will take care of themselves.
Wow. I've never heard that. I mean, that's my approach as well, but I've never thought of it as inputs and outputs, and it was such kind of a beautiful metaphor from engineering. So thank you for that. I think that's going to speak to a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a old fable, I think it is, that I really connect with when it comes to healthcare as well. And that is, there's a man by the river, and a child comes floating down the river, drowning, and he rushes in to save them. And then another one comes down. And so they rush in to save that one. Pretty soon he brings friends to help these kids that are coming down the river. They build a big facility to get these kids out of the water, to keep from drowning. But nobody goes up the river and says, why are they falling in the river? Right? Why is this process happening? Let's go upstream, and look at the root cause.
Beautiful.
That's what we need to do with healthcare.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. So you talked about how you used to be a beer maker, which brings all sorts of baggage, right? Like when you're so invested in your identity is part of, a gluten-based alcoholic product that involves yeast. I mean, it's a whole different thing to ask someone to stop drinking if they're not a beer maker. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the additional push that Lyme disease has been for you, because I know that that's caused an even bigger shift in how you're eating and how you're thinking about nutrition.
Yeah. So, I have a very strong German roots, I believe from Bavaria is where our family came from. My grandfather came here when he was 7 years old in the early 1900s. So we pretty strong, he spoke German and everything. So pretty strong roots there. And, Bavaria is all about the beer, and I had those roots in me for sure. But, once I realized how it made me feel, Maria likes to tell a story. We'd go up to her parents' cabin, and, I would have beer up there, which I typically didn't have at home. And I was like, at first I didn't connect it. And I was like, I go to the cabin and I'm like, I'm getting digestive issues and diarrhea. And it's like, is it the water? Is the water up here? And she's like, no, it's the beer. It was the beer that I was drinking when I would go up there. So, it just, you got to connect the dots and fix those inputs that are going wrong. And I did that, and I just felt so much better. And to this day, I don't drink beer. And it's, we can go into alcohol and all of that, but it's a whole nother issue, but especially for weight loss. But, myself, it was really interesting from the perspective of, a lot of people have dealt with chronic Lyme disease. And we have clients all the time that we help with chronic Lyme. And one of the first things we do is get them on a ketogenic diet, because it can really help. I had been keto for 6-8 years before I started having these symptoms. And I started having this pain in my lower back. I had an old football injury from high school where I damaged a disc. So I'd get it would slip and I'd get shooting pain occasionally. So I thought it was something related to that. but then it slowly moved up my back and into my shoulders, into my neck. And and it was always there. It was always sore, always stiff. My mobility started to reduce, all of the stuff. And this was over the course of, I don't know, 6-7 years. Just progressively, slowly got worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know what to do. And I went and got a standard Western blot Lyme test, which is the standard thing you're going to get if you go to your local doctor. And
if you get anything, that's what you'll get.
Yeah.
You might get nothing.
If they even test you, if you push them to give them the test. Right. And I came back negative. I now know, Lyme literate doctors will tell you that Western blot Lyme test is false negative probably 70% of the time. So I went another year and a half, not knowing what the heck was wrong with myself. And got to the point where, at the time, I don't know, 7-year-old son could throw a football farther than I could and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, something's just not right here. And so I went into a local doctor that we knew, a holistic doctor, and said, I know a lot about biology at this point. I understand what's, the body and what things to look for. I said, here's all the tests I want done. I'm going to figure this out. Give me all these tests. And we did all these tests, and everything came back normal, except for 2 things. My CRP, which is your C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation. We typically want clients below like 1.0 to have, good low inflammation state. Mine came back 50. And I was eating keto. So I was eating, a low inflammation diet to begin with. And I came back really high. And the other thing that came back high, or actually low, was my hemoglobin, my red blood cell counts. That's why I was having issues with energy and all this stuff. So at that time, and then I knew, okay, something's really wrong here. And at the same time, our publisher said, I really do think it's Lyme. Here's a test you need to get done. It's called the IGeneX Lyme test with co-infections. And I got that test done and came back positive for Lyme, came back positive for co-infection, one of which Babesia eats at your red blood cells and reduces your red blood cell counts. So now I finally had an answer. That was about 2.5 years ago. And that's when I started looking at carnivore, because again, being a researcher, I started diving into the research and trying to understand what I could do to help myself, because I was already keto. And what happened was, there's some people out there that have been doing this for quite a while. One of them is Charlene Anderson, who she over 20 years ago started carnivore for her chronic Lyme disease, because that's what helped her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She's doing it for over 20 years and she's thriving. So I said, I'm going to try that. And within a couple days of going full carnivore, from what was close to carnivore already, the keto that I was doing was, not a lot of, it wasn't baked goods and almond flour and all that. It was, primarily meat with some veggies, not a lot. Within 2 days, I would say my migrating pain was gone. My back pain and neck and all that was reduced a lot, the overall pain level. And that's within a couple days. And the migrating pain was the big one, because it's common with Lyme and mold issues, is that you have this migrating pain where, you wake up in the morning, it feels like you've sprained your knee and for no reason, like you barely can walk on it. The next morning it's in your ankle. The next morning it might be in your hips. And it's debilitating because you can hardly get around. Within 2 days of cutting out all plants, it was gone. And so I've done a lot of research to understand why that might be, but we can get into that.
Yeah, and I want to get into that. But first, I think I'd like to take a step back, because even though keto has become much more popularized in the last couple of years, certainly last year, there are probably people who don't even know what that is who are listening. And I'd love for you to give kind of an overview with the understanding that there are lots of different ways to do a keto diet. And I will say, in case you don't mention it, these guys, the reason I love Craig and Maria so much and refer people to their cookbooks all the time is because they're not a keto diet that includes a lot of allergens. So you can be on a keto diet and still have a bunch of crap in your diet. So
Yeah.
You're going to learn right now from the guys who are doing a keto diet correctly. So have at
it. Yeah. So carnivore is really, that's the other thing too. We get some people, oh, you're carnivore now, so you're not keto? No, carnivore is just keto without plants. Like, I mean, you're still keto. You've just limited plants. And the reason for that can be a lot of reasons. In our Carnivore Cookbook, I made a big emphasis on what's your why. What is your why for doing carnivore? Are you doing it for chronic disease, Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders, bipolar disorder? All of those things have been seen huge improvements with carnivore. If you're doing it for those reasons, you might want to go all the way down to a real basic level of like just beef and salt at first to see and kind of use it as an ultimate elimination diet to, slowly add things back in and find out what your body can tolerate. If you're doing it for just general, health and weight loss, then you can kind of play around with different proteins and different things. But really what it comes down to is, what's your why for doing carnivore? And that kind of changes how you do carnivore. But at the end of the day, carnivore is just keto without plants.
Fair enough. And for the listeners, keto is a high-fat, low-carb, moderate protein diet that is high enough in fat / low enough in carbs and moderate enough in protein. And that might be a little different for everyone. But the bottom line is it switches your body and your metabolism into a state of fat burning as opposed to using glucose, glycogen, sugar, carbs for fuel. So it just moves your whole body into burning fats rather than carbs.
I would say one thing about that is that the high fat, moderate protein, low carb gets a little miscued in general. And especially as keto's gotten more popular, people kind of focus on the high fat too much. And what I mean by that is if your body's already high fat, i.e. you want to lose fat, some of the high fat comes from the body.
Right.
And that's a lot of the keto, experts nowadays, they make that mistake that you got to eat 70% of your calories from fat to be keto. And that is not true at all. You can eat nothing and be keto, right?
Right. Well, being keto just means you're in ketosis and burning fats. But if you're trying to lose your fat, you don't want to add too much extra fat because you want your body to, once it switches into fat burning, to burn what's already on you.
Exactly. And that's why we kind of look at it as more as protein's a goal. You got to get so much to maintain muscle. Carbs are, minimum as low as you can keep them. And then fat kind of becomes this lever you adjust based on your goals. Exactly. And the same applies for carnivore.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about the research that supports carnivore. I mean, one of the things I generally think and teach people is that plants have all these wonderful vitamins and some minerals and a lot of phytonutrients. And so as I'm thinking about it, and although I told you before the interview, I've actually only been eating meat all day just because I was like, I'm going to talk to Craig Emmerich. I'm going to in case something goes down, he can talk me off the ledge, right? It's been fine. I feel as keto as I always feel and great. But I do worry about what am I missing if I'm not getting plants?
Yeah. So let's dive into that. First, let's step all the way back and look at how we became human. Okay. If you look at early humans and Neanderthals, those are groups 30 to 100,000 years ago. And the reason they're an important group to study and look at is because that's when we grew these big brains. And that's when we started to learn how to use fire and tools. We kind of diverged from, a primate type, category to something that is a human, right? That you can use started growing this big brain. What they've done is, and there's been more and more studies coming out on this, they look at the isotopic analysis of the collagen in their fossil bones. What you do when you do that is you analyze the nitrogen groups in the collagen. If you look at the nitrogen groups, you can tell what protein they ate. Was it a plant protein that they primarily made up their protein sources? Was it, animal-based, fish? What type of animal? Woolly mammoth? You can look at the nitrogen in the collagen and tell what they ate and how much protein they ate.
In other words, you really are what you eat, and a million years from now, people will be able to just
be able to tell where your protein came from.
That's so funny.
And so what they did when they did this, and they've done it over and over on many different fossils of that period, Neanderthal bones, early human bones, teeth, they've done a lot of these analyses, and they keep finding the same result, which is compared to, they also analyze bones of other animals of that time period. So you look at lions and hyenas and bears and, caribou to see what their nitrogen content was to compare against. These early humans were higher level apex carnivores than lions, than hyenas, than anything else of that time period. They primarily ate animal proteins. That's how they grew this big brain, because animal proteins are very nutrient dense. And that is what fueled this growth of this big brain. That you're having a big brain, you need to make compromise. There's something else we won't get into too deep, but there's something called the expensive tissue hypothesis, where you have very expensive tissues. That means tissues that require a lot of energy. Brain is like one of the most expensive tissues. So you need very energy and nutrient dense foods to supply that brain with fuel. And that's animal proteins. And that's where we can dive in, where you discussed, plants versus animals. If you give the average person a plate and there's a steak on it and some kale and some blueberries, and you ask them, where's the vitamins and minerals coming from? And most people will say the kale or maybe the blueberries. But we did these charts in our books, and the reason we spent whole chapters on this is the vitamins and minerals in that steak beat any of those. There's more nutrients and more vitamins and minerals across a wider range of nutrients than just about any food. Animal proteins are some of the most nutrient dense foods out there, but somehow we've lost this knowledge. Like even when I was researching this, 4 or 5 years ago, when we first started writing our keto book, I had been into biology for a while at that point, and I didn't know this. I didn't know that steak had all the nutrients that, was on the plate. And so we needed to get this out there, that the things that really nourish you and that come with some of the most vitamins and minerals are animal proteins. And if you really want to talk about a superfood, beef liver and some of the organ meats are off the charts. Like there's probably no food on the planet that is more nutrient dense than beef liver.
Wow. So what does your typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner situation look like now?
So right now, let's see, I had Maria made a bacon wrapped meatloaf that I had for breakfast this morning. So it's just basically, hamburger and bacon. Let's see, in the evening, I'll typically have either a steak or maybe a bunless burger or something like that. It kind of varies, some of it depends on, recipes Maria's making. If you make the recipe, I usually eat the results. But it's primarily, I would say mostly beef, but I have been able to do things like, everything from crab legs to, fish, and I do really well with any of those animal proteins. So I've been able to incorporate just about any animal protein and do well.
And it sounds like you're getting a wide variety. You're getting a pretty wide variety of different animals and different types of animal proteins. Is that important? Is that important in eating?
Not necessarily, but it can be for a couple of things. There are certain nutrients like selenium or zinc, like in oysters, that can be extra high. So not that you have to eat those foods. It's just you're getting a little boost in all these nutrients when you eat a varying array of these foods. Like eggs can be choline and some of the things that are high in eggs. So you can get even higher amounts of nutrients in different nutrient categories, where if you put that all together, you get a really high level of nutrients across a wide range.
And are you, I'm curious about whether you're supplementing with anything that people might need to think about if they're taking out vegetables, or is it just what's your supplement regimen right now?
Salt, pretty much just salt. I'll take magnesium in the evenings, just because like 70-80% of people are deficient in magnesium regardless of diet. We just don't get it from the water supply and soil anymore like we used to. So I think everybody could supplement with magnesium. But mainly just in general, it's really just magnesium, salt, maybe a little electrolyte where I get some potassium as well. But that's about it.
Now I'm guessing you're not using table salt.
No, we use usually Redmond's, salt, because it's an ancient sea salt from a cave that, modern sea salts can have microplastics or things that aren't desirable.
Such a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, cool. So who at this point who's listening and is like, I'm ready to jump into carnivore, who shouldn't do this? Like, are there any contraindications to doing a carnivore diet?
I don't know of any contraindications. Like, I don't know of any situation where you shouldn't try carnivore. I honestly think everybody should try it for even just a couple weeks, it doesn't have to be, again, the beef and salt situation. It can be, we defined 4 different levels of carnivore in our book. Beef and salt's level 1. That's the most stripped down. Then level 2 is basically all animal proteins. Level 3 is you add in eggs and then maybe dairy if you're not sensitive to it. But, if weight loss is the goal, we kind of keep everybody off of dairy. And then level 4 is kind of what you might call zero carb, where it's essentially you can have spices and, things from the plant world that are basically zero carb, or, sauces like mustard that are basically zero carb. So somebody who's just going to give it a try, they might want to do the level 4, and get the different zero carb type stuff in there to keep some variety. But I think anybody trying it will see benefit. And again, going back to how we became humans, this is kind of how we ate, right?
Kind of our diet.
Yeah, and you can take that a whole couple other levels of exploration deeper, because if you look at our digestive tract, we have 3 big differences between us and other primates. The first one is our small intestine. Small intestine is really good for processing meat. Small intestine on humans is about 3 times longer than other primates. The large bowel, which is good for digesting plants, our large bowel is about 1/3 as long as other primates. The cecum, is where you store plant matter and turn it into something the body can use, saturated fatty acids. On a koala bear, it's this long curly pouch, holds all that plant matter that it ferments. Humans, at the beginning of the large bowel, it's you can't even call it a pouch. It's just kind of there at the beginning, and that's why we don't digest plant fibers anymore. They go right through us. So you look at that, then you look at stomach pH. Stomach pH correlates really well with the type of things you eat. So if you're an herbivore, you eat nothing but plants, they have about a 5 to 6 stomach pH. So pH is 7 is neutral, below 7 is more acidic. The lower you go, it's more acidic. So plant eaters are 5 to 6. Omnivores that eat both are about 4 to 5. Carnivores, lions, and those type of things are about 2 to 3. Humans are 1.5 on average. So we're designed to eat this. This is how we are designed.
Yeah, this brings up a concern for me, which is that a lot of my patients aren't at 1.5. They've been taking proton pump inhibitors like, Prilosec and omeprazole for years, and they're not making stomach acid anymore.
Yeah.
How do those people do? How do they fare on a carnivore diet?
Really well, and we actually have those people add an HCl and maybe a digestive enzyme to get the stomach. PPIs are just terrible, and they're so widely used. When I see these, when we get clients like this, I see these 1-year-old babies getting put on PPIs. It just drives me insane. Typically it's actually an issue of not enough stomach acid, not too much. And by adding the PPI, you're just making it worse. And even I believe the medications still say you should not take for more than 2 weeks. And yet people live on these things for 20 years. It's eating carnivore, I think, will help. There's if you come out from the standard American diet, you're going to have some adjustment period. You're going to start out, number 1, with probably kind of you might get some of the keto flu type things because you're coming from standard American, right? And you cut out the carbs and you're going to kind of have carb withdrawals and got to keep your electrolytes up to keep those kind of symptoms away. There also may be a little bit of a period of adjustment to your gut to processing more animal proteins. So it might take you a couple of weeks to adjust. You can add, again, HCl and digestive enzymes until your body adjusts. But that's what you can expect.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the keto flu, and I wonder what your take is on this idea. So I've heard all the theories about what happens. I don't hear a ton of people talking about the microbiome and you know how we can shift our microbiome within 24 hours based on how we're eating.
Yep.
Do you think there's any validity to the idea that as you stop feeding carbs to the parts of your microbiome that tends to overconsume and then overgrow and then create some problems for some people, and you shift the microbiome to balance that out, do you think die-off plays a role? Die-off of those big populations of carb eaters?
Yeah, there could be actually really kind of three things. Number one, primarily can be electrolytes, just because carbohydrates retain water. And when you eliminate the carbohydrates, you release this retained water, which is a good thing. You don't want to have all that water retention. But with the water goes electrolytes that are bound to it. So there's, sodium, magnesium, potassium. And so you need to be mindful about adding them back in. And if you're doing keto the right way, where it's a whole foods, nutrient dense, whole food approach, guess what? Whole foods don't come with sodium. And so you got to be mindful about adding the salt. And we're always taught, avoid salt. And so this, a whole nother issue. But, we get so much sodium that we don't even know about in the standard American diet. A McDonald's milkshake has more sodium than their French fries. I mean, it's just loaded. And so when you go to Whole Foods, there's no salt. You got to add it. And that in addition to cutting the carbs, and you really got to be mindful about electrolytes, or you can get dehydrated, which means headaches and things, which is keto flu, right? Another issue is some people will get rashes. The rash, I think, can be two things. It could be one, the die-off, like you're saying. It's candida or other things that are feeding and feasting on all this sugar coming in that then die off. Some of them die off, and you can cause rashes as they're being detoxed. The other thing is oxalates. We didn't talk about this, but there are negatives to plants. That's the other thing about carnivore is that, and why I think it helps people like me, is that anti-nutrients are in all plants. Anti-nutrients are compounds the body doesn't need or want, or, it's not a vitamin or a mineral. It's something the body doesn't want, like oxalates. Oxalates are these tiny crystals that are in nuts, seeds, leafy greens like kale and spinach, potatoes, kiwi, certain fruits. So it's like a little tiny crystal that looks like a little needle, a lot of them. So these crystals, they need to be detoxed. And guess what happens? A lot of times these bind to minerals to get out of the body. They bind to calcium, they bind to magnesium, they bind to other zinc. When they bind to calcium and they go out, they can accumulate and create a calcium oxalate kidney stone. So a lot of times that is a source of this issue. But again, these are things your body doesn't want. And when you eliminate them from the diet, the oxalates that have accumulated in the body start to get pushed out. And sometimes you'll see, if people go carnivore, they might get a sty in their eye. People have even seen where actual crystals come out of their skin that are getting pushed out from these oxalates being pushed out of their body. Yeah. And again, back to the autoimmune issues and everything, these crystals can cause irritation in the gut. They can cause leaky gut, which of course is a big source of autoimmune disease issues, where stuff is getting through the gut that shouldn't be and cause autoimmune reaction. So all this kind of relates back to cutting the plants out, cuts out these anti-nutrients, which can allow the body to heal and reverse some of these issues. Beautiful.
Wow. So as I'm thinking about people listening to this and contemplating trying this intervention for themselves, just to see as an experiment how it goes, you said pretty much everyone can try it, and you gave some really nice guidelines for people to watch and pay attention to so they don't hurt themselves. Or have symptoms, right? Are there some good resources that people could go to get some step-by-step guidance for this?
Well, our Carnivore Cookbook is pretty much outlines the whole thing. We also recently released an ebook as well on, You can get on keto-adapted.com, where we kind of took lots more recipe. One thing about Maria is we make a great team because I can really dive into the science. She has a real good understanding of the science as well, but then she has like this chemistry brain that she can make recipes that are just so innovative, and can take things and make, things that taste great or mimic the traditional foods, but just cut out the bad stuff, the stuff that you don't need, the carbs, the whatever. And she does this with carnivore as well. And one of the things I love to talk about is her pudding, which is hard-boiled egg pudding. So she takes hard-boiled eggs and she makes it into a pudding. And this started as necessity for us because we had our kids we brought home at 1 and 2 years old when we adopted them from Ethiopia, and they just ate what we ate, and they thrived and went from barely registering on growth charts to 50-75% within a year or two.
Wow.
But what happened was our son Kai really didn't like eggs. She knew how good eggs were for him, so she's trying to find every method of cooking them and doing whatever to get him to eat some eggs. Finally, she came up with taking these hard-boiled eggs and putting them in a blender with a little bit of natural sweetener and some cocoa powder, and made a chocolate pudding, and he loved it. Well, you won't believe it if you try this recipe. It's on our YouTube channel. It's unbelievable. You leave it in the fridge overnight, and the next day it has zero eggy taste, and it's just chocolate pudding. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that can really help you if you're going to go into this, kind of stay on it and have these type of variations that keep you on track.
Beautiful. Yeah. You're the Mind Body, is it Mind Body Health? Maria Mind Body Health also has a bunch of recipes that
Lots of free.
I'm looking for something delicious to substitute for something that is not great for me. I think it's important to also just reiterate, like when we were talking about keto diets and talking about carnivore, you're choosing the best animals. You're choosing the humanely raised, the properly fed animals that have been eating a diet that was intended for them naturally. Right.
Yes.
So in the same way that you choose the salt, it's vetted and proper salt, not table salt. So I think it's important just to say that out loud, because not all keto diets are created equal.
Yes. There's a lot of, I don't know if they call them dirty keto or, whatever, where they eat, as long as it has low enough carbs, they eat it, whether it's a chemical or whatever. We're definitely not that. We've always from the beginning been about a whole foods approach. Best quality sources you can afford. I mean, I think that's important to kind of side note on that, like with animal proteins, we always say get the best quality you can afford. Even the ones that maybe aren't the best quality, if your choice is that or Pop-Tarts, it's still going to be better than the Pop-Tarts or the cereal or,
Purdue chicken's still better than Pop-Tarts.
Exactly. So, we say best quality that you can afford.
Yeah. So I want to talk for 1 second about your level 1. Is that what you said? Level 1 for the carnivore, like the beef and salt. So I'm interested about the choice of beef as your kind of ground zero, because I know a lot of people, especially people with Lyme, develop like a beef allergy, the whole alpha-gal syndrome. And I'm wondering if you've come across that in some people with Lyme, for example, or what the rationale was for beef over, say, chicken or,
So beef is the most bioavailable and similar meat that we digest best, and it also links to sort of an evolutionary perspective as well, going back to those Neanderthals and early humans. Those studies, if you looked at what they were eating, it was large herbivores. It was woolly mammoths primarily, as well as some rhinos and things of that time. There was just a excavation in Europe, Northern Europe. They were building something. They found these pits where they were finding all of these woolly mammoth bones, like hundreds of them. And these were traps. So these early humans, this is how they caught the woolly mammoths. They dig these pits, then chase them in there. They'd fall in, and then they would, eat them, kill them and eat them. And there was these huge pits with all these bones in them. And so back to the nitrogen content, they were the biggest source. They showed the charts. The biggest one by far was woolly mammoth. That's a large herbivore that it also can tell you why we have such an acidic stomach pH, because you think about a woolly mammoth, that's a huge animal, massive. A cow can feed one human today for about a year. So you get a woolly mammoth, even if a tribe of these early humans get this one woolly mammoth, they're eating off of it for a long time. Mm-hmm. And they don't have freezers. So that's why our stomach pH, scavengers like hyenas are more like 1 to 1.5 stomach pH. So that's why we're actually closer to them in stomach pH typically, is because we were eating these massive, land animals, and the meat was turning over time. Relating that back to us today, a large herbivore is a cow that is closest to that.
Got it. So I'm gonna take another angle, and just thinking about the way most of us were brought up in this country and other parts of the world to believe that red meat and salt and fat, saturated fat, were like the epitome of how to put yourself on track for a heart attack and a stroke. And I know that a lot of people listening to this are probably having a little bit of a heart attack and a stroke right now, imagining eating all these foods because we've been so brainwashed to think they're going to hurt us. I wonder if you could speak to that and debunk it a little bit.
Yeah, we just did if you search on our blog, mariamindbodyhealth.com, and search for red meat cancer, we just did a big article on that, debunking the whole supposed connection of red meat and cancer. There was just a huge meta-analysis. It looked at all the available data to date on linking meat and cancer. And their total overall conclusion was that there was no to very insignificant correlation between red meat and cancer. And the reason is because you look at these studies that are always hitting the media, and I don't know why these always get so much attention in the media every time one of these very weak studies comes out, and they state it like it's fact. For example, they'll say, another study shows red meat causes 15% increase in cancer in men, in prostate cancer, right? Well, you go look at the study. Number one, it's an epidemiological study, which is basically they give you a food survey. It says, what did you eat this last year or this last 2 years? So mark on here what you ate the last 2 years. I mean, how accurately can you state what you ate this last 2 years? And the other thing about it is they don't give you an I don't know answer. You have to pick one. Was it once a week, twice a week, 5 times a week? So the accuracy is, to begin with, is extremely questionable. Secondly, any researcher that really understands this type of study will say, don't even consider causation unless the correlation is at least 200, maybe even 300%. And these studies are coming out saying 15% increase. That is like within the margin of error on this type of study. They're clearly looking for this connection. And guess what? If you look for a different connection, you see bigger correlations. The China study, which is one of the biggest studies that people point to as far as cancer and red meat. If you look at grains, the correlation is way higher. So you're looking at things like wheat and grains, the correlation in their own data is way higher than what was shown for meat. So it's what you look for in the study, and what lens are you going through as a researcher, what agendas and what funding is behind the study, what answers are you trying to find that shows. And the biggest thing for me is going back to those studies, most of them, guess what the people who ate more red meat also were? They typically exercised less. They typically smoked more. Was it the meat at McDonald's or the large fry bun and huge shake they ate with the meat?
Right.
The problem. Like, you can't vary that out.
Right.
And again, people who ate vegetarian are usually more conscious. So it's healthy user bias. You're more conscious about your lifestyle. You do yoga. You do more exercise. You are somebody who's more conscious about health because you've chosen to be vegetarian versus somebody's eating standard American diet, right? So there's a lot of biases built in, and there's just no real. There's yet to be a double-blind, randomized controlled trial to show any connection whatsoever to red meat and cancer.
Wow. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I have a burning question. Can I ask it?
Yep.
So since starting carnivore and having all these amazing changes that you described, have you fallen off the wagon? Have you eaten a plant? And how did it feel for you?
Let's see. I guess, I don't know if I'd call it falling off the wagon. You know, again, back to when I was keto for a lot of years, my keto was a burger with no bun, maybe a piece or two of lettuce, a slice of tomato, and some zero sugar ketchup. That was my keto, right? I mean, there weren't a ton of plants to begin with. But, you know, I would say it's all about levels or amounts. You know, I've been able to have some dairy and then not have issues. So I'll have dairy occasionally. I will have some spices occasionally. You know, like we do like a Mexican, you know, where it's got Mexican spices, and if I can do pretty well with that. As far as adding plants beyond that, you know, I maybe had some zero sugar ketchup here and there. I don't really notice too much unless I have too much, right? You know, so I can dabble in it if I want to. A lot of times I don't need to or want to. But yeah, I can't think of the last time I had a plant. Oh, well, I guess maybe some onions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we're in Hawaii, they have poke that I love, which is basically raw ahi cubed up, a little bit of mayonnaise, and there's usually some raw onions in there. So I'll have some of those. And again, as long as it's small amounts, it doesn't seem to bother me too much.
And when you have more than a small amount, do you think it's a lack of enough meat, or the presence of these other harmful things in plants like the oxalates, or maybe the...
Well, I think it's definitely some of the anti-nutrients. So if I think about why this works in my situation with carnivore, is that Lyme disease, it depresses your whole immune function. And when your immune system is so depressed, this is what can become chronic Lyme, in that all these things get into the system that normally the body can deal with, whether it's mold issues, whether it's parasites, whether it's heavy metals, which I've had all of those things and all of these issues. And I still have some of them, still deal with mold issues myself. Oxalates on top of that is just another load onto the system to detox and deal with, right? And so when you cut that out, it just lowers the load on an already overrun immune system, right? And I think that is one of the big reasons why it helped a lot. And I can't remember what it was. I don't know if it was I think it was a keto cookie. Maybe a year or so ago, I had one or two of these keto cookies to try. And again, that's almonds and oxalates. Mm-hmm. And I did have knee pain that came back that next day. So, I mean, it's real. And I mean, like we said, it's, if you're in one of these situations where you've got autoimmune diseases, you got Lyme disease, you've got, one of our friends, Amber, she has been carnivore for about 16, 17 years, because of her bipolar. And with keto, she could see some improvements, but not really stop the progression of it. With carnivore, it's held at bay. And, so, you know, there's a lot of different things here that can really be helpful with skin issues, digestive issues, going carnivore, that it's definitely worth a try.
Awesome. Well, you've obviously done so well with it, and I'm so happy that you're feeling so much better, and just really grateful that you are willing to share all this information with us. I think it's going to help a lot of people to think through some new options.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Before we end, is there anything else that we haven't covered, or that you really want to say from your heart to this population of folks?
No, I think, you know, I think we have to look past, I would say two things. Number one, look at your body as a system, you know, look at the inputs, fix those inputs. And a lot of this is not only cheap or free, most people that do an honest accounting of their budget, of their grocery budget, when they go keto, they save money. Okay, you eat less. There's not expensive processed foods. That's number one. And number two, a lot of these other things we're talking about are free. Get good sleep. Get some common sense sun exposure. Get some exercise. Those don't really cost any money. But these are all inputs that can really affect your health. And then lastly, giving something like carnivore a try. I mean, especially if you've got these conditions, it's definitely worth giving it a shot. And, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But if you feel the way I and many other people who do this feel, you won't want to go back. Most of our clients, they stick with this lifestyle because of how they feel, not because of the weight loss. The weight loss is like an extra bonus to how amazing they feel and getting off medications and all of that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Craig. It's been such a pleasure. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.